Dream Team by When Icarus Flies, a general audience's Batman fanfic tagged for graphic depictions of violence. Additional tags for Jason Todd as Red Hood, Stephanie Brown as Spoiler, Hurt Jason Todd, Explosions, Jason Todd centric, Stephanie Brown centric, Good Sibling Stephanie Brown, Good Sibling Jason Todd, Stephanie Brown and Jason Todd are siblings, Protective Stephanie Brown, Injury, Alternative Universe, and Fluff. The second part in Siblings, I guess. Summary. Hood sighed. How about we make a deal? For a moment, when Steph woke up, she didn't know where she was. There was a blanket covering her, and a dull ache in her thigh. Her mind felt like it was filled with cotton. She sat up, the blanket falling off her and spots covered her vision, like when you got up too fast, but worse. Steph laid back down, waiting until her vision cleared, and then sat up again. Slower this time. She looked around what appeared to be an apartment. There was no furniture, other than the couch she was laying on, and the coffee table next to it. She didn't know where she was, and fear spiked through her before she remembered the events of the previous night. Right, Red Hood's safe house. There was a glass of water on the coffee table, and a bottle of pills. She picked them up and examined them. Painkillers. Strong ones. She must already be on some sort of painkiller. Otherwise, she would be feeling much more pain than she was right now. But it couldn't be as strong as this one. Steph tossed the blankets away from where they had pooled at her waist and examined her injuries. Most of her uniform was still on, but parts had been cut away, at her thigh, her hands, her ankles, and from her neck upwards. These were different from the slashes that tore her uniform. They were careful and calculated. Steph only had wisps of memory from when she arrived here. She must have been half unconscious. It probably would have been a lot easier to just remove her uniform, instead of cutting it away. But she appreciated that Hood didn't. She checked all her injuries, carefully unwrapped and rewrapped bandages, prodding bruises and scrapes, and doing her best to examine her broken fingers. Red Hood had either hired a doctor, or he knew what he was doing. She glanced around the apartment again, confirming she was still alone, before her gaze caught on a piece of paper that had fallen on the floor. She picked it up and looked at the words written in neat handwriting. Gone out. Be back before noon. The clock showed that it was only 10:30. She had an hour and a half before Hood came back. Steph swung her legs onto the floor before standing up. The pain in her leg wasn't too bad, but she wouldn't be able to move very fast. Getting out of here is off the table, she thought. Time to find out everything I can about Red Hood. An hour later, Steph had come up with nothing but some surprisingly good-looking food and a change of clothes. She flopped on the floor, ready to accept that she had wasted an hour wandering around the apartment, moving around furniture, getting nauseous, and probably worsening her injuries for nothing. Wonderful. She stared up at the ceiling for what felt like forever, fingers running over the gaps between the floorboards beneath her. I'm going to break a nail, she thought, dejectedly, as she dragged it along the edge of the floorboard. Her fingers skirted along the floor, picking at a few floorboards. A poor attempt to pry them up. Just as she was about to get up, her fingers landed on a gap that seemed minusculely bigger than the others. She didn't think anything about it, at least not until she picked at the floorboard and it moved. Steph shot up, causing spots to appear in her vision. Brushing them away, she moved to the side, giving her a better angle to pry up the floorboard. Say what you want about Crime Alley apartments, but the floor does not usually come apart that easily. The floorboard gave way easily, and she saw a box made out of... Was that lead? Whatever, it was fairly small, but it was easy for Steph to locate the only object inside it. It was a small black book, the kind you could get from the corner stores for $10. She flipped through it, it only half full, scribbles of writing filling the pages. Why would Red Hood keep a secret book? She glanced at the clock. 5 minutes left. Steph wasn't going to take any chances. She stuffed the book up her shirt and began pulling the floorboard back. As soon as she had slotted it into place, the door opened. Steph opted to flop back down on the floor instead of trying to get back on the couch. "What are you doing?" It was phrased more like a statement than a question, though it might just have been the helmet. It had been almost 12 hours since they had come back here. Had he been wearing that thing the entire time? Laying on the floor? Steph answered with an eye roll. "Right," Red Hood answered, before walking slowly around her to the kitchen. Are you going to get off the floor, or... He chose to gesture vaguely at where she was laying, instead of finishing his sentence. "Yep," Steph said, voice a little strained as she sat up. She had to hold her arm over her stomach, somewhat awkwardly as she stood up, in order to stop the book from falling onto the floor. "Your stomach okay?" Steph laughed nervously. It was a habit she carried over from her childhood. "Yeah, just hurts a little." She doesn't know what'll happen if Hood found out that she took his book, but it probably wouldn't be good. After a long moment, he replied, "Okay." Steph relaxed. She was safe for now. I got a change of clothes for you?" Red Hood said, holding up one bag Steph hadn't noticed until now. "Just so you can go home without any trouble, you know." She took the bag from him. "Thanks." "The bathroom's over there." He nodded to where Steph had already known the bathroom was, thanks to her snooping. "You can keep the bag." He gave him what she hoped was a cheerful grin and not a painful grimace. "Thanks." Once Steph was in the bathroom, after double and triple checking the door was locked, she took the clothes out from the bag. There was a baggy pair of sweatpants, a red shirt with a graphic design of a mushroom, and a hoodie that was a few sizes too big. Steph wasn't one to complain about perfectly good clothes. So she quickly changed, stuffed the book to the bottom of the bag, and piled her uniform on top. She took a second to smooth her hair down in the mirror, before realizing how obvious it made the bruise on her face. Steph adjusted it so it fell over her face in a way that made it less obvious. With the hood over her face, the bruises were only noticeable if you were looking for it. She pulled the hood back down, grabbed the bag, and walked out of the bathroom. Hood was in the kitchen, still wearing the helmet, but walking around, moving various Tupperwares about. When he saw her, he held out one of the Tupperwares. It was full of pasta. Steph took it hesitantly. "Thanks? I doubt you'd feel like cooking much when you get back." Red Hood offered, in explanation. Right. Steph had been ignoring the growing pit of hunger, but now that it had been mentioned, she found it was hard to ignore. "Right, thanks," Steph said brightly. She felt like she was saying thanks a lot today. It was unsettling, being indebted to someone who could kill you if they wanted. Steph also wasn't stupid, and she didn't miss the not-so-subtle sign that Hood wanted her to leave. Not that she was complaining. Once she got outside, Steph put the Tupperware inside the bag. It was just a paper grocery bag, but she wasn't complaining, as long as it got her back home. The walk back was fairly uneventful, and once she was inside, she could see her mom had been home in her absence. Hopefully, she just thought Steph was sleeping, and once in her room, she could see nothing had been disturbed. After eating the surprisingly good pasta, seriously, say what you want about Red Hood, but he was a good cook, and changing some of her clothes, she set to unpack the rest of her stuff. Steph salvaged what she could of her uniform, and made a mental note to get some more of what she couldn't replace. All that was left was the book. Steph picked it up and turned it around in her hands. There was nothing special about it. She opened it, and wow, Red Hood had neat handwriting. It was the sort of fancy calligraphy that you saw in old movies about the mafia. But just as she was about to start reading, she heard the front door open. Steph quickly hid the notebook in the top drawer of her dresser and walked out of her room to say hi to her mom. Stephanie Brown was weird. If there was anything Jason had learned from his various encounters, it was that. He had also learned that if they didn't reach some sort of agreement soon, then one of them would end up dead. "Hang on," Stephanie grunted, half pulling, half dragging him into an alleyway. This had all started about 2 hours ago. Jason hadn't seen or heard spoilers since she left his safe house. But he had seen Stephanie Brown, who had, according to her, been mugged. Hence the broken fingers, bruises, etc. He had absolutely no doubt that once her injuries had healed, she would be back out on the streets, as spoiler. Unlike before, Jason was keeping a close eye on her. He had to find her, to make a deal, and it was probably better not to approach her while she was a civilian. But spoiler still hadn't healed. He figured he had a few weeks until she would be out again. He pushed the topic out of his mind as he walked into the meeting. One of the smaller gangs had asked to meet up. Jason hoped it was an offer to join up with him. He would like the extra manpower. Though it was obvious upon walking in that was not why they had asked to meet him. Several goons surrounding a center figure were currently employed by Black Mask. A change in hairstyle and a pair of glasses didn't fool Jason. The man in the middle did, in fact, work for the gang that had called this meeting. But he was sweating and trembling and very obviously scared and trying not to show it. Something was going on. There were only 4 people in the warehouse. Not an ambush, then. If Jason had to guess, this was some sort of induction, a way for a smaller gang to prove their worth. The member of the gang wasn't the leader. Not actually that high up in the chain of command, if Jason remembered correctly. Someone expendable. By the time he had come to that conclusion, he had reached the small group. "Well?" The man looked at one of the Black Mask's goons, who nodded. "Well, we'll leave you two to talk," he said, sleazily, before the rest of them walked out, leaving Jason and the man alone. "Why did you call this meeting?" Something was definitely going on. I didn't. There was a sinking feeling in Jason's gut. There was nothing around them. Nothing to make the man so nervous. Unless... Jason looked up, filled with dread. There were bombs taped to the ceiling. Not just 1 or 2, but a whole fuck ton of bombs. Too many to count. Jason looked back down at the man, ready to try and talk him down, but only able to watch as he pressed the trigger, tears streaming down his face. Everything was a bit of a blur after that. There was a lot of noise, crashing, and banging as everything fell down. Jason was knocked off his feet, but he scrambled up, only managing to get a few steps away before he doubled over in pain, and a support beam came crashing down on top of him. The last thing Jason saw before he was buried was the man's tear-soaked face, covered in blood, rolling away from his body. When Steph had come up with the story that she was mugged, she had pretty much committed to not going out as Spoiler for a while. But while she couldn't go out as Spoiler, she could go out as Stephanie. She had decided to snoop on Red Hood as much as she could, given the fact, she knew absolutely nothing about the man, despite the fact he'd saved her life twice in the past 3 months. So far, most of the snooping had consisted of finding all of the bases his gang used. Not that hard. Trying to find his safe houses, she had made absolutely no progress, and following him around. Harder as a civilian, but not impossible. She still hadn't gotten time to read the book. During the day, she was either at school or following Red Hood, or her mother was around, and during the night, she was flat out exhausted. And that was how she ended up here. When 4 men had left the warehouse, where Red Hood was supposed to be having a meeting, she figured she'd have a better shot of eavesdropping on them undetected than Hood. She followed them down several alleyways before they came to a stop. Unfortunately, she was still too far away to hear anything, and the only thing in the alleyway she could duck behind was a dumpster a few meters away from her. The men paused, and she took the opportunity. Scurrying forward, she was almost there when she knocked a metal can with her foot. It was the slightest sound, but it caught the men's attention. She dove behind the dumpster and prayed they wouldn't give it too much thought. There was a pause, where everything seemed so silent. Steph was scared to breathe, and then one of the men said, "It's just the wind." Steph breathed out a sigh of relief. Besides, it's not like anyone could do anything now. Building will be blown up any second. What? Right, another voice. Unless the idiot chickens out. He won't, the first voice. He knows what'll happen to him if he does. Steph's mind is still reeling from the information when she heard it. An explosion, somewhere nearby, and then things falling to the ground. One of the men laughed. Told you he wouldn't chicken out. Steph was frozen in place. She listened as the men left the alley, staying until it was safe to leave. Hood. Coming to her senses, she scrambled to her feet, turning around and running back to the warehouse. When she got there, it was still early enough that there were no officials here, but she still pulled her scarf around her neck over her face. It was easier if this was attributed to Spoiler, not Stephanie. How did she find him? She stood there, dumbfounded. How do you find someone buried under rubble? How do you get them out? No better time to learn than the present. It was something her mom said, and Steph began to pick her way through the rubble, looking for any signs of life. She must have been there for 10 minutes before she saw something. She began picking her way through the rubble, faster, only to screech to a stop when she saw it. It was a head. Bile rose in her throat. A head. She turned around and closed her eyes. A head. Concentrate, she told herself. Pulling herself from her thoughts. There was nothing she could do for him now. couldn't have been Red Hood. There was no way he would go into an unknown situation without his helmet on. She made her way back to where she had been standing previously and breathed slowly, trying to center herself. She couldn't waste time. It was then when she heard someone's ragged breathing. It was quiet enough that if she hadn't stopped, she wouldn't have heard it. "Hood?" she said quietly, moving to where she thought the breathing was coming from. She didn't hear anything in response, but the breathing was getting a little louder, so she must be close to whoever was stuck in the rubble. Hopefully Red Hood. "Hood?" "Here." The word was so quiet, Steph could have almost said that it was a gust of wind. She took another step. "Stop." She froze, eyes searching the rubble for Hood. There. Next to her foot there was a shine of red. A support beam was lying across his body. Must have been trapping him. "It's me," Steph said, before realizing that he was probably delirious, and she had her face covered, so that wouldn't mean much. Spoiler, she added hastily. Red Hood only grunted in response. "I'm going to get you out of here." She took another look at the rubble covering Hood. She started to move the lighter things on top of him first. A steel sheet, a piece of wood, a metal pipe, which, with each one she moved, the rubble shifted slightly, and Steph paused, holding her breath, hoping she hadn't fucked up. Thankfully, most everything on top of him was pretty light, and in the next 15 minutes, the only thing left was the support beam. Okay, she was closer to Hood now, who had been silent through most of this process, giving word here or there. When Steph asked him if he was okay, or if the rubble was hurting him. "Okay, I'm gonna lift this," she said. "And I need you to move, because I don't think I'll be able to hold it for long." Steph prayed that Red Hood could still move. Hood grunted. She took that to mean that he was okay with this plan. "Okay, here we go," she breathed, wrapping her hands around the end of the support beam. She lifted it and immediately started to strain under the weight. "Go," she wheezed. Hood tried to prop himself up on his arms, before collapsing again. Steph was starting to get worried. If she had to put the beam down and it landed on Red Hood, it would probably kill him. Thankfully, Hood seemed to realize the same thing, and he rolled to the side, before proceeding to shuffle to the side until he was out of range of the beam. Steph dropped it, and it hit the ground with a crash. Hood was still lying on the ground, and to Steph's dismay, she could hear sirens in the distance. "Okay," she said quietly, standing over him. "We've got to go because the police are coming." "Right. You need to get up." "I am." Hood proceeded to prop himself up in his arms, stand up, sway, and fall back down. Luckily, Steph managed to catch him before he hit the ground. She couldn't imagine hitting the ground, and a million tiny pieces of rubble digging into your skin would feel nice. Steph pulled one of his arms around her shoulder and dragged him into one of the alleyways, just as the police arrived. "Hang on," she grunted. "I can get you back to your safe house. I just need a second to catch my breath." Hood leaned against the wall, before stumbling a few steps forward, pulling his helmet off and ducking behind the dumpster. Judging by the following retching sounds, he was throwing up. Steph turned around. It was one thing to find out his identity through her own intelligence. It was another to take advantage of him while he was vulnerable. She pulled the scarf away from her neck, covering her eyes, and turned back around. "You can cover your face with this." "Thanks." Hood's voice was hoarse. "Do you need help getting back to your safe house?" Steph was almost 100% sure the answer was yes. No. Red Hood apparently had different opinions. She pursed her lips. Right. Well, I'm coming along anyway. Was there anyone harder to work with? She thought, before picking up his discarded helmet and following him. Steph trailed along behind Red Hood for 10 minutes before they got to his safe house. When they got to the door, she sighed. What were the chances she would be let in again? Steph was about to leave when Red Hood held open the door. I need to talk to you. Steph checked the time. She still had about an hour before she had to go back home, and, well, she was curious. Okay. Red Hood closed the door behind her, before disappearing into the bathroom and emerging wearing another helmet. How many of those do you have? Steph asked, gesturing at his head with the helmet she was currently holding. It was identical to the one on his head, except for the crack on the front. The likeliness of head injury was significantly decreased because of it. She thought on autopilot. Maybe I should get one of those. As many as I need. A perfectly vague answer. Do you need help with the medkit? No. Well, okay then. So, she rocked back and forth on her heels. What do you want to talk about? Hood sighed. How about we make a deal? In Steph's defense, Red Hood wasn't all that bad. He wasn't all that bad, and he made promises Steph liked. Promises like keeping her father in prison. Promises like protecting her if he got out. He didn't even ask for anything in return. Besides, he saved her life twice now, and if she didn't trust him, then she was the most paranoid person on Earth. So, what exactly would working together entail? Red Hood had dealt with his injuries after she'd insisted. Apparently, crime lords are immune to broken bones and bruises and various other wounds caused by pieces of rubble, and now they were discussing the exact details of his offer. I would train me, to fight, use weapons, first aid. I already know first aid. Well, then, whatever you want. Alright, what else? I would help you when you get in trouble. We would work together, like we have been until now. Yes, with a little more coordination and less injuries. Right, anything else? You wouldn't work with Batman. That was a weird request, but whatever. Yeah, I'm not exactly eager to start working with someone who dresses like a flying rodent. Great. Is that it? Don't we have to shake on it or something? No. After a moment, Red Hood added, Would you like to shake on it? Look at that. He was almost friendly. Yes. It was almost like a movie. They shook hands and Stephanie grinned. She was part of a team. Spoiler and Red Hood, the protectors of Crime Alley. Author notes. Next one should be out in a while. To be honest, I have no clue where this series is going. I'm just rolling with it. But I think the next one should be a little more fun, less getting blown up. And notes from me, the reader. I apologize for if the audio or reading quality is worse on this one, because I'm recording this in the living room. Steph laughed and nervous. There were only 3 people in the warehouse. That's not that number. Over here, reading the number 4 as the number 3.